Recognize the senator from Iowa.
Thank you. I want to make some remarks about Iran. I do it in light of the fact that diplomacy ought to be used before war, and I am well aware of hard work of our vice president and other people on his team in Pakistan last week, working almost 24 hours to reach an agreement. It was not reached. Some reports late last night, early this morning, indicate that maybe Iran is willing to sit down and talk again. So in light of that, and what we know and what we hope happens, I make these remarks. On February the 28th, 2026, the United States began combat operations in Iran. Action taken to protect U.S. Americans by preventing Iran from ever having a nuclear weapon. That's not only to protect the United States, but that weapon could be used any place on this globe, and we don't want that to happen. But the most important thing is the President, as Commander-in-Chief, is exercising his responsibilities, the number one responsibility that he has and our nation has, to protect the American people. Now, these operations have demonstrated the unmatched strength, precision, and professionalism of the United States military. America is very fortunate to have the strongest military in the world, capable of not only projecting power, but of doing so with discipline, coordination, and a clear sense of mission. I want to express my gratitude and pride in the men and women in uniform who are carrying out this mission, and to let the families of Declan Cody, a young man from West Des Moines, and Major Jeffrey O'Brien, a man from Indianola, Iowa, who both paid the ultimate price to protect us. We think about their families at this time, but it also is a reminder that these men who lost their lives, as well as people who are still fighting, about the courage, skill, and commitment to protecting our nation, reflect the very best of our men and women in uniform. Now, what we've known for a long period of time is that Iran has used their money to finance terrorism around the world. Even in the United States, has been demonstrated by 3 or 4 actions since the war happened. And they're the number one supporter of terrorism financially, and that they use their missiles to blackmail that part of the globe. But what we've learned is they have more capability than just affecting blackmail in the Middle East, because we've learned that they have longer range missiles that could reach Berlin, Paris, and London. And when is the next step that those missiles could reach the United States? So under the leadership of President Trump, the United States is taking decisive action to provide safety and certainty for the American people. More than 85% of Iran's defense industrial base has been destroyed. 150 warships have been destroyed, and 70% of Iran's facilities and ground control stations have been destroyed or degraded. In total, over 13,000 targets have been struck, and over 1,000 attack drones and 700 ballistic missiles have been destroyed. Preventing War through diplomacy is very important, but when diplomacy doesn't work, we've seen in this instance in total over 13,000 targets have been struck and over 1,000 attack drones and 700 ballistic missiles have been intercepted. Preventing Iran from ever acquiring a nuclear weapon isn't just a policy objective, it's a national security priority. I'm encouraged that military operations have been successful in advancing this goal and that Iran has now agreed to a ceasefire as this administration continues to negotiate a broader peace agreement. This success sends a clear signal. The United States will act when its security is at stake, and we will do so with strength and with resolve. The progress made so far underscores both the capability of our military and the importance of sustained leadership by President Trump as our commander-in-chief. I stand firmly behind our service members and remain committed to ensure that Iran never poses a nuclear threat to the United States. I yield and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll, please.
Ms. Salsa Brooks.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we spent the weeks before Easter debating the Save America Act here in the Senate. And since the debate began, we've seen Democrats contort themselves every which way to justify opposing the common sense policies in this bill. On no issue is that more evident than voter ID. Mr. President, polls show that 80% of Americans support voter ID. Majorities of Americans in both parties support this common sense requirement. But among Democrats here in the Senate, it's a different story. Sure, Democrats have spent the last few weeks claiming that they support voter ID. But when it came time to vote on a reasonable, standalone voter ID proposal, every Democrat opposed it. That's right, Mr. President. Senate Democrats have been trying to rebrand themselves as supporters of voter ID. But when Republicans offered a straightforward voter ID proposal, every single Democrat in the Senate voted against it. Mr. President, I want to be clear about what Republicans put forward and what Democrats opposed. Senator Husted, someone who knows quite a bit about administering elections as the former two-term chief election official in the state of Ohio, offered a very simple voter ID amendment. The only thing it did requires a photo ID at the polls. A driver's license, tribal ID, military ID, veteran ID, passport, the types of IDs that are sitting in wallets right now and that the American people use on a regular basis. That's it. Supporting this amendment would not have obliged Democrats to support the underlying Save America Act. Democrats would have been free to vote for voter ID and then vote against the other common sense policies in the Save America Act. But Democrats couldn't bring themselves to vote even for standalone voter ID legislation. And it turns out that when Democrats say they support voter ID, they don't mean actual IDs. Mr. President, when Republicans and Americans, I would argue, talk about ID, we all mean the same thing. Something with a picture, an expiration date, something issued by a government. And to hear Democrats talk in the lead-up to the voter ID vote, you'd have thought that's exactly what they were talking about too. The senior senator from New Jersey went on CNN and said, and I quote, "We all want people who go to vote to show a valid ID," end quote. The Democrat whip said, and I quote again, "I'm not opposed to that. They ask you for an ID at the airport, don't they? That's reasonable," end quote. Yes, it is reasonable. The junior Democrat from New York said this, and again I quote, "The ideas that we have in our wallets should be good enough to vote," end quote. Well, Mr. President, that is exactly what we offered. Licenses, state ID cards, tribal IDs were all acceptable forms of ID in our proposal. The same kinds of ID that we have in our wallets right now. Mr. President, multiple Democrat senators even acknowledge that their own states have voter ID requirements and that they work. The junior senator from Georgia came to the floor and said this, and I quote again, "I think you should have to prove that you are who you say you are before you vote. I support voter ID. We have voter ID laws in my state. You should have to prove that you are who you say you are before you vote," end quote. I couldn't have said it better myself. And the Democrat leader said, and I quote, "Our objection as Democrats is not to a photo ID, end quote. Except as Democrats' recent vote demonstrates, that's not actually true. Before the vote, the Democrat leader spoke on the floor and made it clear that when he says he supports voter ID, he means that he supports voter ID as long as the ID requirements in question are essentially meaningless. And he's not the only one. To quote a recent news story, the junior senator from Colorado said, and I quote, "He supports voter ID, but signaled he will vote no when informed that the bill does not allow voters to use a utility bill to prove identity," end quote. He voted no because you can't show a utility bill as a form of ID. Mr. President, you can't make this stuff up. The senator from Colorado used to own a brewery in Denver. And I have to wonder whether you could show a utility bill to buy a beer there. I doubt it. But this is what Democrats think is good enough for our elections. The Democrat leader has said that voter ID requirements need to be, quote, inclusive and, quote, flexible. And he referenced a bill Democrats put forward a few years ago that included the sort of ID requirements that he says Democrats support. Well, let me read a few of the so-called IDs that that bill would have found acceptable for voters. A debit card, a utility bill, an expired fishing license, any document containing an individual's name, just their name, from any government. And of course, a photocopy of any of those would have been fine too. If this ID list were any more inclusive, Mr. President, my Jones County High School basketball jersey would have counted. Mr. President, in any other circumstance, requiring an ID means requiring an actual ID. You can't board a plane by showing a photocopy of your debit card. You can't do an early pickup at your daughter's school by showing a copy of your electric bill. Mr. President, Republicans believe that we should apply the same standard to voting. The American people are presenting their photo IDs on a regular basis and having a pretty easy go of it. We don't think it's too much to ask for the same when they go to vote. Mr. President, ask anyone on the street for their ID. Chances are they're going to pull out their driver's license, not their water bill. The American people know what an ID is. I guess we're still waiting for Democrats here in the Senate to figure it out. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Elsa Brooks.
Mr. President, welcome, Mr. President.
Democratic leader, thank you.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Well, Mr. President, just days ago, excuse me, I'm going to shut this off. Mr. President, just days ago, Donald Trump declared his war in Iran a, quote, total and complete victory, 100%, no question about it. Again, Donald Trump saying about his war, a total and complete victory, 100%, no question about it. But for the American people, for our troops, for our allies, for our economy, there is nothing but questions about it. In fact, to a majority of Americans, it's a total disaster. In just about every way, things are worse today than they were before Trump started his war of choice. The Straits of Hormuz, worse, closed, unstable. The Iranian regime, worse, more entrenched, more radical. Gas prices, worse, over $4 a gallon. Iran's nuclear ambitions, worse, they're still intact. And America's standing in the world, worse, as the Europeans and our Asian, Middle Eastern allies and so many others are very exasperated with Donald Trump and this country right now. So, Strait of Hormuz, worse. Iranian regime change, worse. Gas prices, worse. Iran's nuclear ambition, worse. American credibility, worse. Everything has been made worse by Donald Trump's war of choice. Donald Trump promised total and complete victory. Instead, he delivered total and complete chaos. That's not victory, that's failure. Donald Trump hasn't even clearly articulated what victory would look like, let alone achieve it. Instead, he has lurched from one reckless idea to the next, with no strategy, no endgame, no coalition of allies. And the consequences, unfortunately, are piling up. Russia's oil revenues are surging, buoyed by Donald Trump's decision to ease pressure and destabilize global markets. An adversary that is fueling the war in Ukraine is now benefiting from this chaos. And at home, Americans are paying a very high price. Inflation is rising again, driven in part by the spike in energy costs. So Americans are paying the price there. Mortgage rates are climbing. Consumer confidence has hit record lows. Donald Trump is leading our troops into a literal minefield abroad and leading American families into an economic minefield here at home. So let's call Trump's Iran policy for what it is. Not Operation Epic Fury, Operation Epic Failure. Operation Epic Failure is a much more appropriate name for Trump's war of choice. And 45 days into this war, Congress has been sidelined because our Republican colleagues refuse to take a strong stand against this war and duck it completely because they're afraid of Trump. No hearings, no oversight, no serious oversight, no accountability, not one. I say to my Republican friends, this is not how democracy conducts a war. That is not what the Constitution allows. So if Republicans refuse to do their job, Senate Democrats will force the issue. Under the War Powers Act, we will bring a resolution to the floor this week, led by Senator Tammy Duckworth, a combat veteran who understands the true cost of war far more than Donald Trump ever has. And we will not stop there. If Republicans block it, we will vote again and again and again, every single week, until Operation Epic Failure ends or Congress does its job and authorizes it, which I know it won't, given how bad this war is. Because our troops deserve a mission, not a mess. They deserve a strategy, not chaos. And they deserve leaders who understand that sending Americans into harm's way is a most serious decision a nation can make. Our Republican colleagues face a simple choice: stand with Americans or stand with Trump's failed war. Stand with our troops or keep them in harm's way without a plan. Stand with the American people or keep asking them to pay more for gas, more for groceries, and more for a war that has made everything worse. We will keep forcing that choice. We will keep forcing that choice, my Republican colleagues. You won't be able to keep ducking it. I'd like to thank Senator Kaine for his tremendous leadership on this issue. I'd like to thank Senator Booker and the members of our caucus for working with me to ensure we have these votes week after week, unrelenting, until Republicans are ready to stand up, listen to the pleas of Americans, and do their job. Now, on DHS and Department of Homeland Security and Reconciliation. And like Trump's disasters abroad, Republicans are ignoring their disasters domestically as well. Instead of ending Trump's disastrous war in Iran and addressing the affordability crisis that is crushing working families across the country, Republicans continue to sow chaos here at home by keeping the Department of Homeland Security in a state of shutdown. Democrats put forward common sense, bipartisan reforms to rein in ICE and Border Patrol's lawless activity. Reforms, I might add, that most Americans support and that local police departments across the country practice every single day. To be clear, Republicans could open DHS if they wanted to. We also passed twice a bill that would easily fund all of DHS aside from ICE and CBP. But no, House Republicans would rather bog down the Senate in a partisan clown show with their reconciliation proposal. Why? To placate Stephen Miller and an unelected ideologue that has built a career rooted in cruelty. So let's be clear what Republicans have chosen. Not a clean funding bill with common sense reforms, not bipartisan solutions, because they can't support these things. Instead, they fight them because Trump and Stephen Miller force them to be opposed to the common sense proposals we have made that most Americans support. The Republicans here in the Senate and the House have chosen chaos. They're dragging the Senate through a painful, arduous, and partisan reconciliation process, not because it's the best path, but because they cannot and will not rein in ICE and Border Patrol or stop the violence. They want less accountability, not more, because Donald Trump and Stephen Miller told them so. That is disgraceful, dysfunctional, a disservice to the American people. Americans want ICE and Border Patrol reined in. They do not want to see the Senate give ICE and CBP a blank check so that these rogue agencies can continue to act with impunity, unleashing violence and disorder on our streets. They do not want to see an extremist like Stephen Miller calling the shots on American immigration policy. Instead of listening to Americans, Republicans in the House and Senate are obeying their orders from Trump and Stephen Miller. On the SAVE Act and election interference, perhaps it's unsurprising that an administration and a party that is so out of touch with the American electorate and so fearful of a November washout would go to such great lengths to rig the rules in their favor. But that's exactly what Donald Trump and the GOP are doing. Yesterday, the Brennan Center reported that more than half of local elected officials are concerned that political leaders will interfere in their work. We all go to the polls. We see these election workers. They're dedicated. It's an act of patriotism when they sit by the polls and count the votes and administer the election fairly. But Donald Trump and the GOP threaten them. I would be worried, too, based on what we're seeing from Donald Trump's party, if I were an election official. Apparently, the GOP has given up on trying to win over the electorate by delivering results, so they're instead trying to change the electorate with their SAVE Act. It would kill online mail and motor registration, forcing Americans to drive, sometime hours, to register in person. That's hard and costly in the best of times, but especially when gas is $4 a gallon. It would purge millions of Americans from the voter rolls. It would make it harder for married women to vote, and it would reject the most common form of IDs Americans use to register. The only thing Republicans are trying to save with this legislation is their own skin in the next election. The only thing they're trying to save is their own skin, because they know they're going down to defeat electorally. If the GOP spent the same time and energy trying to deliver for working families as it does trying to rig the rules, maybe Republicans would have a chance. But that's not what they're doing, and we're going to do everything we can to stop this evil act from ever becoming law. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Majority Whip.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to waive the mandatory quorum call in relation to the Wolfe nomination.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor today to tell you, to tell the body, and to tell the country that Republicans are going to fully fund Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as well as Border Patrol, and we're going to do it through the end of President Trump's term in the White House. All the way through, not just to the end of this year, this fiscal year, the calendar year, all the way till the end of the time that President Trump is in the White House. And we can do it without a single Democrat vote, and we're going to move forward without them. The Democrats want to defund law enforcement in America. It's disgraceful. It's shameful. But that's who that party has become. They want to end immigration enforcement in the United States Republicans will never let that happen. Senator Schumer and the Democrats engineered this dangerous, reckless shutdown that we're currently living in. It is a shutdown of American security and American law enforcement. Now, they've done it for one reason. They would rather protect illegal immigrant criminals than protect law-abiding American citizens. For the last 2 months, Democrats have fought to turn America into what some would call a sanctuary country, what I would call into a country that harbors and protects illegal immigrants. That is what they are trying to do. Those are their beliefs. They rally around the country to proclaim it. They voted to defund ICE. They voted to defund Border Patrol, the very men and women who are hired to keep our nation safe and secure. They tried to ban masks on ICE agents. Well, that would allow the gangs of radical thugs who travel the streets at some of these rallies to threaten agents in their own homes, to terrorize their families. That was the demands that the Democrats made in the negotiations. They all have one thing in common: they make our nation less safe. Clear and simple, they make America less safe. That's who the Democrats are. And that is why Republicans have rejected all of the things that they've been demanding. Thanks to Republicans, immigration enforcement and border security will be fully funded. And they'll be funded without conceding a single radical Democrat demand. Democrats have spent the last 2 months trying to handcuff ICE and Border Patrol agents. Republicans are going to make sure that ICE and Border Patrol is fully funded as long as President Trump is in the White House. So here's what comes next. I met with President Trump at the White House on Friday afternoon. Senator Lindsey Graham, who's chairman of the Budget Committee, and I visited with the president. We shared with him that Senate Republicans are not slowing down. We're united around a targeted, focused reconciliation bill. And we are moving immediately and quickly to fully fund and strengthen ICE and Border Patrol. We're going to do it with a simple majority right here in the United States Senate, and we're going to do it for the long term. No more hostage-taking by the radical Democrats. The safety and security of the American people is much too important for that. Senate Republicans intend to meet President Trump's June 1st deadline. The men and women of ICE and Border Patrol are American heroes. They protect our nation from murderers, from drug traffickers, from rapists. They protect our nation from repeat illegal immigrant criminals. These are the individuals who should not have been left into the country in the first place when Joe Biden and the Democrats let 10 million illegal immigrants flood into our nation during those 4 years. When Democrats obstruct this critical work, innocent Americans pay the price. Remember Sheridan Gorman. She was 18 years old, just 18 years old, and a student in Chicago. Last month in Chicago, she was shot and killed in cold blood by an illegal immigrant criminal. Sheridan's killer entered our nation in 2023. The Biden administration let him in. He was one of 10 million illegal immigrants allowed to enter the country. And of course, Chicago's sanctuary city laws, they're proud of there, it shielded him from deportation. The city of Chicago and their mayor protected him. He turns to be a murderer. And don't forget Richard Williams. He was that 83-year-old United States Air Force veteran. Last month in New York City, the minority leader's hometown, he was shoved on the subway tracks by an illegal immigrant criminal. Died of his injuries. His killer had a lengthy criminal record, but the sanctuary city laws of New York protected him, so he kept doing criminal deeds and acts against American people and our properties. Sheridan Gorman deserved better. Richard Williams deserved better. Every American citizen in every American community deserves better than what the Democrats are trying to hoist upon all of us. This is what Republicans are fighting for. That's why we're here. From day one, President Trump and Republicans have fought alone to secure the border and to enforce the law. Democrats responded with opposition, with obstruction, with extremism.
Republicans will do what's necessary to fully fund our national security, and we will protect law-abiding citizens, not illegal immigrant criminals. The American people have long demanded secure borders and safe communities. President Trump and Republican leadership is going to continue to deliver. Mr. President, Senator Schumer and the Democrats may scream, they're not going to stop us. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk, call the roll.
Ms. Alston-Brooks.
The senator from Iowa,
I ask that the calling of the quorum be suspended.
without objection.
For several Congresses, I and others in this body have been trying to bring attention to Swiss banks trying to hide assets that they accumulated during World War II, and joining my colleagues in efforts to make sure that justice is done for the wealth and other private property that was taken from Jewish people who died in the Holocaust. So once again, I'm back to give a report and an update on that effort. In February this year, I chaired a bipartisan hearing on my ongoing Credit Suisse Nazi account investigation. That hearing was supposed to, in part, highlight the collaborative and cooperative work of the bank UBS, which bought Credit Suisse, along with Neil Barofsky, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and the Senate Judiciary Committee. And what we have achieved up to that point. UBS had committed to fully exposing the wrongs committed by Credit Suisse. After all, the information about Nazi evils belongs to humanity. But when UBS was informed that my committee may potentially hold a hearing, the previous cooperation that we got from UBS was scaled back. Mr. Barrasso testified this to the committee, quote, "Shortly after I told UBS that this committee was considering holding this hearing, UBS informed me that it would, for the first time, conduct a privileged review and withhold certain relevant privileged material from me and my team," end of quote, from Mr. Barofsky, the chief investigator of the information that we're trying to get from UBS. Now, according to Mr. Barofsky, UBS leadership provided misleading information to the committee, even after being warned that they were misleading the Judiciary Committee. For example, at the hearing, UBS testified that it had withheld fewer than 150 documents from Mr. Barofsky. But Mr. Barofsky said his team emailed UBS before our hearing expressing, or quote, expressing concern that using the word document was misleading, end of quote. Mr. Barrasso said in this instance the word document actually meant, quote, hundreds or even thousands of pages of many different documents together, end of quote. Following the hearing, Mr. Barrasso told the committee that he urged UBS to, quote, correct any misimpressions it may have made upon the committee when it referenced the number of withheld and redacted documents as being only 150, end of quote. And according to Barrasso, these documents are, quote, relevant to the question of whether a Nazi had an account or didn't have an account with Credit Suisse. To date, UBS hasn't provided a true account of the amount of pages at issue. However, Mr. Barrasso informed the committee that as of March 11th, 2026, approximately 23,000 pages of materials had been redacted or withheld from him. UBS also took legal action against the Simon Wiesenthal Center. Last week, thank God, a federal court in New York issued a ruling against UBS's efforts. However, if the bank were successful in that court case, it could have blocked the Simon Wiesenthal Center from fully speaking on all Holocaust issues, very much a violation of First Amendment rights of freedom of speech. Following the committee hearing, UBS failed to fully and completely respond to all questions for the record submitted by members of the Judiciary Committee. Now, I'm going to talk about a Mr. Grassley, not different than Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Grassley is president of the UBS Americas. That bank literally failed to answer any questions posed to him during the hearing. His disrespect for the committee is noted. So be on notice, Mr. Grassley. So I kept the hearing record open, and this week I've sent additional questions for the record to the bank, UBS, and to others. Mr. Barrasso has told Mr. Grassley has since provided supplemental responses. He's informed the committee that UBS has refused to investigate credible leads on Nazis and their facilitators, looting of Jewish assets, and facilitation of rat lines. He's also told the committee that UBS has imposed an arbitrary July 31st, 2026 deadline for completing this investigative work. Certainly, as I am an investigator, I understand timelines and deadlines, but I also know that you can't enforce deadlines at the expense of quality of the investigation. UBS has taken the position that it, in and of itself, will decide after what they're going to do to cooperate. after the current investigation concludes, whether to investigate remaining leads. Now, this senator was born at night, but not last night. UBS needs to quit playing games and get the job done right away. UBS has spent millions of dollars on investigative work. Why not investigate these Nazi evils right now? What are they trying to hide? UBS's current position will unnecessarily create a cloud of doubt over the final report of investigation. As I said in March, I plan to call a follow-up hearing before the end of this year. My goal is that this hearing will bring closure to the investigation in a way that brings justice to the Jewish community and the victims of the Holocaust. UBS's conduct is interfering with that ultimate goal, and given their recent national charter bank approval by the U.S. government, UBS has a heightened responsibility to be fully forthcoming on this matter. I urge them to get back on the right side where they once were, because looked like we had very faithful and dedicated communication by the bank to our investigation. And why all this impeding of further investigation, I don't understand. I encourage Mr. Barrasso and the Simon Wiesenthal Center to keep my investigative team updated on all ongoing matters, whether it's good or whether it's bad. This senator's efforts to expose Nazi evils will not stop. I yield.
Mr. President,
Senator of Arkansas.
today I urge my Senate colleagues to vote to confirm the nomination of the Honorable John Thomas Shepard to the United States District Court for the Western District of Arkansas. Throughout his career, Judge Shepard has worked to uphold the rule of law, preserve public safety, and keep crime out of our state. Whether representing the people as a prosecuting attorney, presiding from the bench as a circuit judge, or practicing law in the private sector, Judge Shepard has handled a wide range of cases with an exceptional track record. Those who know Judge Shepard can attest to his professionalism, his commitment to serving Arkansans, and his dedication to his family, many of whom have also answered the call to public service. A native of El Dorado, Judge Shepard is also a leader in his community, serving as a volunteer youth coach for the Boys and Girls Club, a radio color analyst for the El Dorado High School football team, and an active member of his church. I am pleased to support Judge Shepard's nomination, and I urge my Senate colleagues to vote to support his confirmation as well. Thank you. I yield the floor.